Good. While we still see people connecting, give us 1 more minute to start our second session of our maritime webinar series, this time with the Global Shippers Alliance, looking at the container shipping crisis, its impact, and why it is different from anything we have seen before. 60 minutes of insightful discussions. And I see we now have already 100 participants, and we are 1 minute past 3. So let me stop sharing the screen and join you all for our live webinar streaming. So a wonderful good morning, afternoon, evening from wherever you connect in these very interesting times. My name is Jan Hoffmann. I'm head of the UNCTAD Trade Logistics Branch, Division of Technology and Logistics. As I said, we have 1 hour of interesting exchanges in front of us. Just this morning, preparing for this webinar, I was looking at the very latest freight rates, and to get a 20-foot container from Shanghai to Santos at a spot rate of $9,449 for a 20-foot container. And that does not even include a number of surcharges. So you can easily assume more than $10,000 door to door for a 20-foot container. This had been down to just $100 5 years ago. Now, $100 was too low as well. This would not cover carriers' costs. It's a very volatile market. So today's rates, both for spot and contracted rates, are at historical records. On different routes, they are between 3 and 7 times higher than the 10-year average of the 10 previous years. And the perspectives for the freight rates to remain higher, not necessarily as high as now, but to remain higher than the average, there are a lot of indications that the rates will remain higher. There's for quite some time, and don't ask me for an exact date. Maybe one of our panelists has a date if somebody asks. But we certainly have a continued COVID situation. We have continued quite high demand. We have the prospect of costs associated with the energy transition. We have the impact of concentrated markets, which we will certainly discuss during this hour, and the volatility also of a very long-term shipping cycle, which is currently more on the upswing. So these issues and others we will discuss with a great panel of experts. We will start with Denis Schumert. He is the chair of the Global Shippers Alliance, our partner for the session. Happy to have you with us. Denis, he will give the introductory remarks from the Global Shippers Alliance. Then we have the key presentation. I've already seen it. It's very insightful from Shaishan Sharon-Tsuk, chairman of the Thai National Shippers Council and representative of the Asian Shippers Alliance. So really glad to have you with us. And then we have discussants. We have John Manasbel. He's director of the Foundation for Future Supply Chain. Very good to have you with us, and happy to be on your board as well. Thank you for this too. And last but not least, as UNCTAD, we come last but not least, my dear colleague Teresa Moreira. She is the head of the Competition and Consumer Policies branch at UNCTAD, with whom we collaborate closely, especially when it comes to shipping costs. We had a very good joint intergovernmental expert meeting. So John and Teresa will be like the commentators. But then, very important, we promised each other not to be too long. Juan Luis also joined from the same group. So we will have a conversation here about these questions. And for this very last point, housekeeping point, you, the participants, you have the opportunity to send us questions. And if you want comments, and then the question is, do the panelists agree? Yeah, that's the way to, when I'm asking, do you have a question? Then you have an opinion and ask if you're right. We don't know, but so please use the Q&A function. So we have tested it before because last time it didn't quite work, but we tested it. So the Q&A function should work. So dear participants, and we are now at 140 already, that's really great. Please use the Q&A Zoom function to pose your questions. And me as moderator will then pass on those questions to the different group after we have gone through our presentation and discussion. So without any further ado, I will now very happily give the floor to Denis from our partners of the Global Shippers Alliance to make your introductory and setting the scene. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jan. I think good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Welcome. Well, I think I would start with two keywords we have been hearing everywhere in the last 12 months, and especially since the last beginning of the year. It's unprecedented and totally disrupted, totally disrupting. And then a few questions. Who is guilty? Who is faulty? Is there a bad guy side, a good guy side, or everybody is a victim? Well, never since the global expansion of the liners market in the 80s, we have seen such a chaotic situation in terms of acuteness, in terms of duration of the crisis. The causes are multiple and they are well known. First, the numerous impacts of the pandemic have left the various forecasts and strategic plans completely outdated for all parties. Then the weak elasticity of the demand side, of the supply side, sorry, on the maritime market was not able, of course, to absorb the rebounds of the US consumers' demand since autumn and beginning of the year, especially. Rebounds just beyond the pre-pandemic level, not a big surge, but still a difference, a very big difference with the drop in demand in spring 2020. And then there was a chain reaction of destruction of efficiency all along the supply chains. Every minor problem impacting the downstream or upstream operations, be it the seafarers, pandemic situation, the truck drivers, port operators in the US and elsewhere now, and the congestion in many ports now. So once the liners Swiss clock, well, it was never really a Swiss clock, the liners services, but still they were targeting to have a kind of Swiss clock, a quality of service. But once these services were blown apart, then the situation was out of control for everyone. Of course, there is strong possibility that in the aftermath of this crisis, things come back to a normal or to a different normal with different practices, different regulation. We are going to discuss that together in the coming minutes. But still, there will be strong marks among many actors, the shippers first. We have been suffering a lot of this and are still suffering of this situation. Because today the scene is more a stage of war, everybody trying to get the best out of this chaos, and nobody wanting to imagine something different as being egocentric about its operations. For many SMEs, the tariffs are prohibitive. They cannot ship their production, they are losing market share, they are losing money. Of course, your organization, UNCTAD, has all along in parallel with WTO and WCO, have been doing a lot in the past and now to facilitate world trade. But at the same time, the present market is preventing, especially SMEs, to benefit from those trade facilitations. The majority of goods, as you know, is transported by sea. And we can say, and we have said in European Shippers Council, which I'm chairing as well, that the liner market is, the liners are the gatekeepers of the maritime market, the same way on the trade by extension, on the same way that the GAFAs are the gatekeepers of the digital market. So this puts a heavy burden on the shoulders of all supply chain partners. And there will be winners and losers out of this situation. Of course, on the winners side, the large carriers and their alliances, because they have perfectly played the coordination or at least the common behavior end in the past. And they might do that the same in the future when the demand subsides and the overcapacity comes back. But they've been profiteering of this chaotic situation. On the winner side, also some people put the big freight forwarders, but on the loser side, clearly the trading SMEs worldwide. We see completely crumbling of all supply chain among these SMEs because they cannot absorb the cost of transportation and handling the goods. So that sometimes their whole model, when it's low-cost goods, is completely not sustainable. And those who might have a chance to survive this situation will find a world where I would say the containers transport will be completely different. They will have to be, I would say, more predictable, give more visibility to their suppliers, to their service providers, and this might be not so easy. So shippers and liners have always been discussing prices and services level in the past, but it might be a different ballgame in the future. So the Global Shippers Alliance, GSA, which I'm honored to chair, has been created by Asian shippers, by European American shippers, to defend the interest of shippers in international trade worldwide, and in particular for these smaller parties, weaker parties, which are SMEs or operators, traders in the emerging countries, less industrialized countries. So yeah, we are grateful that UNCTAD has been offering GSA the possibility to express its voice in your maritime webinar series. So we are hopeful that this collaboration with UNCTAD to voice the concerns of shippers worldwide will continue and will be successful. The key to unlock this present crisis will be found in better collaboration in the market. So together with carriers, of course, forwarders, and with shippers, we should look in the future for solutions to increase the efficiency of supply chains and better use of scarce resources, ships, containers, ports, operations, and so on. Digitization, of course, will be an important enabler, but as some people say, never waste a good crisis. Let's try to realize this together. For us, the end result will be sustainable, fair, and a well-functioning maritime market. Otherwise, we would have lost the war for nothing. So thanks again for the invitation, and I hope that we will have, I'm sure we'll have a very fruitful discussion now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Denis, for these very insightful introductory remarks and really showing how it affects you and you as a shipper and representing the shippers, and really happy to have you as a partner in this session. So without further ado, let me then pass on the floor to Shaishan, who we have tested before, has a very interesting presentation prepared. The share screen seems to work. So there we are. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hoffman. And thank you for UNCTAD to invite Thai National Shipper Councils on behalf of Asian Shipper Councils. There are total 7 members in this society. So if we look at the freight cost and the container shortage, I think now it's uncertainty and very complexity issue that is become the crisis. So before starting, so we have to manage by fact, not by feeling. So we have to understand what happened and starting from the cause and effect analysis. Starting from the global supply chain, now every countries at the moment connect each others in the global supply chain. It seems like the theory, the butterfly effect. When the butterfly, a little butterfly, fly from US and affect to everyone in the world at the moment, even at the small animal and affect to everyone, same like a COVID. Starting from the reason why we have the containers shortage due to the unbalancing of the supply and the demand. For the supply side, from the shipper, from the shipping company, the liners. So since the COVID start in the late 2019, we have seen that the efficiency of the port operation everywhere has been locked down because of the COVID, and the less of the laborers and the less of the driver to drive the truck in the port. So that's why the container flow, unloading and loading, is very less efficiency at the moment until today. So and also the second issue, that is the consignee, the importer in each destination, they have a lockdown because of the COVID. The operation, they cannot unloading and receiving the container from the port. That is the reason why the container circulation at the port and last year is quite low, around 30%. And even now today, it depends on the port. In each port, the container circulation is depend. And effect to the transit time extend because of the loading and unloading is no any more efficiency. So that's why the lead time and the throughput is not balanced at the moment. So that is a supply side of the container. And when we look at the demand side, unbelievable, in the late 2020s, the demand is increased drastically. And from the China, is the largest manufacturing countries. And they need the container for the exporting to everywhere, especially the main port in US and Europe, and also in Asia. Even today, at the last hours, the custom in China, they announced that the export growth in China, 32%. That is a high growth export during the last 6 months. So that's why now they need more container for the long haul to US and Europe. So that is become the serious issue. And also last year and today, there is no any new container built up. But a few months ago, I have received the information that in China, they have a new containers around 500,000 every month. So it means that it will release the pressure of the container shortage. But anyway, the container shortage is one issue. Another issue that is effect to the no space availability due to the frequency and the demand of the container is pumped up. That is a reason why the space is now like the goal, because every shipper need to export their products. Otherwise, they cannot compete with others. So the space of the vessel, I say again, is a value for the money. And that is those effect to the freight cost increasing. No choice, because we have no any other mode of transportation by vessel only. 90% of the global transportation we have to ship by the vessel. No any others from the inland is very few. So 90% we rely on the vessel. So that is the effect to the all the business at the moment. So the problems I has already mentioned, the port congestion due to the unreliable schedule. So at the moment, the global schedule reliability is just only 40% till today. In the past 2 years ago, 7% or 80%, but today still 40%, increase a little bit from the beginning of this year. That is the effect to the container circulation. So that is no doubt that why the freight cost increasing. Next, the effect on the economics, as Dennis has already mentioned. So the logistic cost increasing definitely, but its effect to the lead time, to the supply chain, that is a longer lead time and no any just in time anymore, because we don't know when the vessel available and when the vessel arrived at. This is a big question mark, and this is a very more challenging. Now the vessel delay 1 week or 2 weeks, it depends on the destination due to the port congestion. So I summarize that the reason now is very complexity due to the supply chain, global supply chain. and we have to solve one by one. The first one that we have already discussed in the ASEAN Shipper Alliance, the meeting on the 17th June last month. We have to do something. We cannot leave anyone alone. We have to do right now, otherwise it's too late. So first, we have to think about the cooperation, and we have to submit the right information to the neutral parties, like a competition commissioning or the competition authorities, in order to help us to accelerate the freight cost. Is there any reasonable? Because if we do nothing, the freight cost is, I cannot see the end of the tunnel, the end of because the freight cost now is unstoppable. So this is the one issue that we have to discuss openly and the right information tonight. And the second, for the short term, we have to balance the revenue of the shipping company to make the fair and the competitive the freight cost by making the service contract, in order to improve the efficiency and the reliability for the shippers and the liners. And also, we have to utilize the e-commerce and the information flow. Otherwise, all information is connect each other. It will have a missing gap between the shippers and the others related parties. This is the cause and effect today. Look, when you know the reason, it's just only intangible. In this graph, it shows the tangible result, that if we focus on the four major ports. The first one, Shanghai in China, Singapore, LA in US, and Hamburg in Europe. So, and we see the balancing. So you will see that if there are any, we have to set the standard line in the dot line, red dot line. If there is anything above or equal, it means that in and out, loading and unloading the container is just like a just in time, 1 week. So you will see that now in Shanghai and in Singapore, it seems like the shortage is some time. When we compare with in LA and in Hamburg in Europe, you will see that there's a surplus container a lot because of the container circulation and the port efficiency. And also, there is no anything export from Europe or from US to Asia, because most of the industry still locked down and still run at the low capacity, and no any goods export to Asia. So that is the fact information. So that I has already summarized. And once we look at the demand and supply, has already know that it still have an unbalancing demand and supply of the container. Definitely, that is a direct impact to the freight cost and the space of the vessel. So you see the freight cost from Shanghai export to Europe. Now the freight cost is unbelievable high. So it's increased 8 times, 7 times. It depends on the situation, demand and supply of the container. Okay, let's see at the below one. Export from Shanghai, China, and to US, the freight cost is also increasing 4 times at least. It depends on the situation. So in this graph, it's crystal clear that now it's very challenging for everyone to control the freight cost and logistic cost at the end, in order to improve their business, because their business is shut down more than a year, and today is a good time, but unfortunately the road is not so smooth for them because of the logistic cost is too high. So I point out, not complain anyone, because the freight cost is one thing, is above the iceberg that you see the tangible, and everyone complain that the freight cost is too high. But please me have a big remark, the under the iceberg, there are a huge invisible costs. For example, the opportunity loss, because now everyone try to export in order to get the revenue to the countries. But due to the container shortage, no space availability, and the freight cost increasing, they lost the opportunities. And also the logistic cost internally, if they do not arrange properly, it will affect to the total logistic cost. There is an idle cost at the end. So I think the shipper liner, the liner, the vessel company is the one. And there are many others stakeholders, they have to help each other in order to reduce the invisible cost by improve their container circulation in the countries, loading and unloading more efficiency in order to reduce the transit time. Otherwise, the shipping company cannot reduce any freight costs. So that's why we have to help each other. We have to make the ecologies. I mean that we have to rely on each other. We are the friends. So that's why this is the joint statement from the Asian Shipper Alliance that we have a meeting last month. We have a three joint statement. One, we have to voice and we need the cooperation. We need friends to help us. Otherwise, we will corrupt very soon. If the consumer price increasing, the inflation increasing, I think it's not good and beautiful for futures. This is number one. Number two, we need someone to help us for the competition rules. Otherwise, we cannot excel or we cannot find the right and fair freight cost. And last but not least, for the collaboration, we need the information flow each others. So we need Global Shipper Alliance, European Shipper Alliance to join us and to exchange the information. Last, our voice now is President Joe Biden received this critical and crisis information, the freight cost issue. Now is a global issue. So we need not only UNCTAD and other authorities to help us, not only help the one company, help everyone, help the global company to step up and find out the right and the fair cost of the freight cost. So that's why last week, President Joe Biden discussed with the Federal Maritime Commission to discuss to join hand with the Department of Justice. I think that is might be the right timing, and I need to see the solution. Otherwise, we cannot see because of this crisis is very complexity and unpredictable. If we do not think the freight cost cannot stop, we need everything to be balanced with the reasonable freight cost and the fair in the economics, global economics, not just only one country and one society. Thank you very much for your attention for 10 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shaishan. Very insightful, a lot of fascinating aspects. You did mention the impact on prices. You discussed, like, can these increases actually passed on to the final client, and are they willing to pay? We just recently did some basic calculation. What does this increase actually mean for the final price of different goods? And it depends, of course, very much on the value of the goods, on the route, and also the volume. So if you have a very high value good of small volume, like a high-end smartphone, even with these high freight rates, it is still below 1% of the value of the good. So some carriers, now I make also this mistake, some carriers say, look, it still doesn't matter. But then for other products, high volume, not so high volume furniture, for example, the current level of freight rates per furniture piece is as high as the value. So it's like doubling of the value. And this is no longer doable. So then we start having impact on trade. It takes time. Of course, some things are ordered. I have to deliver, I promised, but there will certainly be impact. So a lot of these very insightful causalities that you presented very nicely in this flow, if one had another 10 hours of webinar, one would go through this product by product and route by route and see where do we see the first impact. But I've already spoken too much. We actually also have already now 7 questions, comments in the Q&A. I will go through them after I've given the floor to our dear 2 panelists. And I will start with John Manners-Bell, who is the director of the Foundation for Future Supply Chain. John, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jan. And I will, conscious of the fact that we have a number of questions, I will keep my remarks to a minimum. I'd like to thank the previous 2 speakers. I think did an excellent job in really summarizing the situation or the mess that we seem to have found ourselves in. I just sort of like to preface my remarks. I found a really interesting piece, I think it was on Twitter or LinkedIn, which I'd like to read because I think that really summarizes where we are. It says, I have cargo in China, but I can't get a box. When I get a box, I can't get a ship. When I get a ship, I can't get a berth. When I get a berth, I can't get a truck. When I get a truck, I can't get a chassis. And when I get a chassis, I can't find space in a warehouse to take the cargo. So I think that sort of summarizes really the situation. And the point they were trying to make was it's not just about any one part of the supply chain which is problematic or overwhelmed. It's about the whole supply chain being saturated with cargo. And that's their view of the situation. Now, of course, it's easy to play the blame game, but who is there to blame? And there are another commentator I saw suggested that the problems have been down to decades of weak public management, underinvestment in maritime infrastructure, and an undeserved demand for maritime transport and low interconnectivity. So the whole problem has come about through decades of really underinvestment. So I think that maybe is a sort of a longer term blame game, as you might say. But of course, I don't think I've ever been, and I go back to the sort of mid-1980s in terms of my own experience, but I've never experienced the levels of animosity between all supply chain partners. And that's even within sectors. If we see the large forwarders at loggerheads with small forwarders, we obviously see the shipping lines, but we also see the ports, the trucking companies. Everybody involved is at their throats. And I think this is such a difficult situation, especially when we're trying to build a future post-COVID as well. We my partner company TI Insight undertook a survey just at the beginning of the year, asking the survey respondents whether they thought that things would change for good or whether this was just a transient issue. And 60% of the respondents said that they believed that the changes that we're seeing at the moment will be hardwired into the future. But what we need to ask, well, what does that really mean? Because we've all been aware going back 30, 40, 50, probably 100 years that the shipping industry is very exposed, very vulnerable to boom and bust. You know, we're already seeing now that there are record levels of ships being ordered. You know, those ships will come online maybe in a year's time once they've been built, probably at about the time when we see the volumes start dipping. And of course, from where we go now to record highs in terms of rates, we're likely to again to see record lows, unless of course the shipping lines manage that capacity. There are people on this call who are far more aware and far more experienced and experts in this than I am. But in looking at it from an overall supply chain issue, then obviously we see the shipping lines are coming under a huge amount of criticism from politicians. We've already seen President Biden being mentioned in terms of his asking the FMC to take a look at the sector. We're not really too sure what that will mean. We've seen huge amounts of consolidation within the shipping industry, but are we going to see any of that unraveled? I can't imagine that we are. But without more fragmentation and more flexibility in the industry, I think we're going to see these problems repeated time and time again over the future. We're seeing, especially in the developing world, that they are the real losers from this. Many countries in the developing world have been sidelined. We're seeing shipping lines, the major shipping lines, not calling at their ports anymore. We're seeing that the costs rise for exporters from developing countries to try and get their goods, even if that's possible, which in many cases it's not, into the Western markets. And I think this has huge implications, really. Firstly, and I think as Denise mentioned earlier, talking about small and medium-sized companies, you know, that they have really been, you know, maybe that the multinationals have been, through their links with the shipping lines, have been able to continue a service, even though one which is disrupted. But the small and medium-sized companies, the ones which are really dominant in many developing countries, have lost out. You know, they can't book space. Even if they do, they're not able to afford the prices on the spot market, which are looking at, you know, as we've seen earlier, $10,000 or whatever it is. And then I think, just to finish, I mean, I could go on for ages, of course, but to finish, I'd just like to look at the damage this is doing, not only to the industry, but the damage to the global economy and global politics as well. Because the last major crisis that we experienced was around 2008, 2009, the downturn then. And I was attending a lot of WTO meetings and a lot of World Economic Forum meetings at that point, where speaker after speaker from developing countries was standing up and saying, you have abandoned us. And they were talking about the financial system at that point. You know, the Western banks had withdrawn money from the developing, they stopped their loans, etc. What we're seeing this time around is something very similar, but with the shipping system, which has abandoned many countries in the developing world. And what happened last time was that a lot of these developing countries were driven towards China because China came with a blank checkbook to them. And I fear that that will probably be the result of this crisis again. You know, there is a palpable feeling in the developing world that once again, when there's a crisis, they get forgotten about. The West looks after its own, and the developing countries have to look after themselves. And then into that vacuum steps countries such as China, which they've already well established their Belt and Road Initiative, which will link them to markets. And so I think this could add to a real restructuring of global supply chains and the fracturing of global supply chains as we look to the future. But yeah, and I better stop at that point. There are many other points that hopefully we brought up in the Q&A.
Thanks a lot, John, also for bringing up the issue of the developing countries, the smaller, the more vulnerable economies. And some of you may have seen, we recently concluded a comprehensive impact assessment of the implications of future decarbonization measures. We only looked at the short term, not so ambitious ones, but there too we simulated that smaller, further away, more vulnerable economies will be affected more by such changes. And And we see it here now in this live, real life experience we are participating in. Very happy to give the floor to my dear colleague Teresa, head of the Competition and Consumer Protection Policies branch. Thank you for joining us, give the perspective from UNCTAD and our work on competition issues. Teresa.
Thank you very much, Jan, and greetings to the other panelists. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. Of course, I think it is an essential subject, and especially the competition issues affecting the sector, as our keynote speaker mentioned. Well, for the participants, I would like to say that, first of all, that UNCTAD happens to be the focal point for competition law and policy within the UN system, because we are the guardians of the only internationally agreed instrument in this field, the UN set of principles and rules of competition, that actually is almost 41 years old. Why am I mentioning this? Because today we have something like 140 countries across the world having adopted and established specific institutions on competition law and policy, and even regional economic organizations across the world, namely composed of developing countries, have committed to work together on competition law issues and even adopted provisions at regional level. So this is just to, from a slightly different perspective, of course, but to say that there is quite a high degree of awareness and even of convergence on the importance of competition law and policy as a tool to support countries' growth and development strategies. And this is being clearly very much recognized and owned by developing countries across the world. Now, traditionally, I should say that, and not specifically starting with the issue at stake, but the maritime sector in general has traditionally been subject to analysis and discussions between competition experts. Well, in the EU, there have been block exemptions on conference of liner shipping, and so special exemptions from the full implementation of competition rules due to the specificities of this concrete aspect. But of course, when we talk about ports concessions, when we talk about other specificities of the maritime transport in general and the maritime sector, it is clearly a sector that for decades has raised issues from a competition law and policy point of view. Now, as the previous speakers very rightly and with a lot of expertise mentioned, it has been traditionally a concentrated sector, which of course is always a source of concern for competition authorities, which look to high market concentration as having the potential to lead to abuses of market power, basically. So even the questions at stake, these high prices could, well, very, very theoretically come from this issue, but I understand very well that this is not the case, since it seems that because of the pandemic, there have been major disruptions in the supply chain, and now it is a time for imbalance between supply and demand, and this of course has led prices to rise, particularly for imports into the US, mainly from Asia. So, of course, supply chains cannot efficiently handle this extreme increase in demand, and this led to delays, to disruptions, capacity shortages. But I see that the trend is very worrying because, of course, it's very abrupt. And as John, the previous speaker, mentioned, from UNCTAD's point of view, of course, that is a major concern from the point of view of the needs, of the interests, of the challenges of developing countries. So I wanted to draw your attention also to the fact that even though the sector, let's say the broader sector of of maritime transport, allow me to talk about this, has been traditionally concentrated. There were a number of consolidations, as mentioned earlier. For instance, it has been considered by an OECD study that the container liner shipping sector was actually a competitive market, even though supply was growing faster than demand, resulting in lower freight rates, of course. Then the issue was that failing freight rates would push smaller companies out of the main trades and into niche markets. And of course, right now, with the pandemic, the disruption had other impacts. I also wanted to draw your attention to the fact that several competition authorities across the world, so I started just by mentioning the EU because there was a question regarding these blockade exemptions, if I understood correctly, but several competition authorities from developing countries, and I would just like to underline some cases, some investigations undertaken in Latin American countries, such as Colombia, such as Panama, such as Peru, and also Brazil. So there is quite some a habit of competition authorities across the world to look into this sector, of course, different aspects. Sometimes it regards port services, and again, very high market power that can lead to abusive behavior. In other cases, collusion between companies on pricing and rates for containers, cargo transport services. I'm talking specifically of a case that was dealt with by Panama. In Colombia, an interesting study on the port sector aimed to assess if regulation was being effective and if there were competition issues. So a sort of market study that is used as a tool for a diagnosis in order to see, of course, how to improve competition, always recognizing the high level of concentration. And the same thing in Peru, where I think there were issues concerning, that came out of the joint work of the competition authority and regional port authorities. So this is to say that, again, this is typically a sector that has been in the focus of competition authorities. I think that right now, and I noted that the keynote speaker, of course, mentioned competition authorities. Allow me to put, again, things into a broader context by telling you that last year, when the pandemic, when we faced the pandemic outbreak, competition authorities across the world were at the forefront against abusive behavior, taking advantage of the lockdown situation in most cases, or of shutdown of businesses. So exceptionally, in very concrete cases, competition authorities adjusted a little bit their approach and, for instance, allowed cooperation agreements, which are usually illegal, between competitors in order to ensure the supply of key consumer goods and services. Exceptionally, in some cases, some governments imposed price caps to, again, key goods like personal protection equipment, etc. And also other agreements, cooperation agreements, joint purchasing agreements were exceptionally and temporarily authorized due to the very exceptional and difficult circumstances taking place. Now, why am I mentioning this in what regards this specific issue? This is to say that, of course, even though we have heard from previous expert speakers that this is not necessarily a situation that was caused by lack of competition or deliberate anti-competitive practices, it is definitely a situation that deserves to be looked into and demands action from several, I would say, public authorities, obviously in dialogue with business associations represented, namely here in the panel, But this is to say that authorities, even competition authorities with governments, can put a stop, can control temporarily and exceptionally a very high rise of prices, when such prices, as mentioned earlier, are obviously having a negative impact in SMEs trying to export. When we know we have a study of UNCTAD of November 2020 that was updated at the end of March this year, which assessed the impact of COVID-19 in trade and development. And one of the conclusions of the update of March 2021 is that, of course, small and medium-sized companies were the most seriously hit by the pandemic across the world, namely in developing countries, where they tend to have to be more representative, so to speak, where they have a bigger share. And so the fact that they cannot meet these extremely high prices in order to export their goods is obviously a source of major concern. Now, is this again something to be dealt with immediately by competition authorities? That would not be our view. This would be that competition authorities should be involved in this solution, should be participating in discussion this and other possible solutions with governments, with port authorities, with other specific regulators. But this is clearly something that also involves competition law and policies issue. Now also, and I will finish with this, Jan, I think there are quite a lot of challenges also for these industries, if I can put it like this, for this sector. And of course, they are related to digitalization, also to the demands of this green recovery that is a general common goal, but that will have costs, that will imply adjustments and adaptations, and won't necessarily be very easy to meet without funding, without financial support, especially for developing countries. But this is also an opportunity, and we know that the European Commission is about to launch a number of measures that will allow the EU to meet requirements of the recently launched European Green Deal. And definitely from here, we can, in a way, have a clearer idea of what are the next steps. But at the same time, it's quite obvious that this will imply meeting more requirements, which can be challenging, especially for small operators. In any case, this crisis, like so many others, will provide an opportunity of improving productivity, a more efficient management, as mentioned by our keynote speaker. I think that for the time being, this will be my remarks. I think if you allow, when the questions arise, my colleague Juan Luis Crucelegui, who has really studied the sector, may add something more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Apologies from the moderator for having planned that we would now have half an hour left for discussion. And then with these enthusiastic panelists and speakers who seem to have 300 seconds per minute, that we now have 5 minutes left, and we can go a little bit beyond. It's really up to you, the colleagues and the participants. We might extend a little bit beyond the 60 minutes. So what I would like to do now, I will very, very briefly go through the 16 questions, just basically mention them. They're very much interrelated. Then give each one of you, the panelists, the floor one more time, and maybe for UNCTAD would then be Juan Luis, but they will go the other way around. So Juan Luis would start, then John, then Chai-Chan, and Denis will have the famous last word, because our partner, like, you have the final word. We will not be able to answer all questions in all detail for time, for different expertise, and really mostly for time. So let us please all focus on a few questions. Now, the good thing is you have the people who are participating, you have registered, we should have your email. You have also my email, it is on the event announcement. I can also put it in a minute in the chat. So questions that we have not yet answered, we can follow up. So I will share them with all the panelists. So we might have a few of written exchange. Some of these questions may require, we can refer to other studies. So just to manage expectations, dear participants, we will not answer all your questions, but you have good questions like, number one, what stopgap solutions should the governments adopt? What can governments do? Mark mentions digital solutions exist, and we have a very extensive project at UNCTAD with partners in ESCAP, in Latin America and others, where we actually benefit from existing solutions to improve logistics and digitalization. Then there is the issue on the smaller markets. I think John in a way referred to it. It is true. Sometimes when there's a shortage of equipment, who gets the one container that is in Shanghai? It's the one who pays more, and it's a business class client. No? Then there's, of course, the question, what about the EU consortium block exemption? I think that's something, maybe Juan Luis, you want to say something about it, but please don't try to answer it comprehensively. Then there's something about, it says shippers, but probably, Jean-Paul, you mean the carriers actually. There was a situation where at the beginning of the crisis, there were these blank sailings, containers were left and so on. I dare say that today there's no left spare capacity, no purposefully idle left capacity. Panelists may agree or disagree. The presentations, we will try to find a way. If Shaishan agree, your PowerPoint we might share with participants. We hope to find a way. Then there's a question on these premiums. Of course, what's the GSA? Denis will answer. Do you like surcharges? That's your last question. Now, and of course, the one thing is the freight rates. I think we have very nicely shown that this is very much linked. The one thing is the price, the other one is the available capacity, and it's linked. There's a question on the sulfur emission control areas, a very technical question. In fact, yes, they do have an impact on freight rates. What's the role of BIMCO, that's a private sector, on controlling freight rates? Good question. That's a difficult one, maybe for Juan Luis. And the oligopoly situation or not. What can UNCTAD do to support? Another long question I've put, what we can do in terms of policy recommendation. We can do technical assistance. We have the intergovernmental machinery. We cannot impose anything. That's the one thing we cannot do. We can advise, we can research, we can provide fora, we can do what we try here, we improve transparency. Another what the opportunity for UN agencies, the local value chains or not. Yes, of course, also especially the context of carbon emissions, environmental externalities. However, please do not generalize that something that comes from closer by is automatically environmentally better. I'm originally from Germany, and I still remember how we were digging out coal from 100 or more meters below the surface, whereas in South Africa, it was at the surface. So the environmental externalities and energy required and emissions to get coal from 100 meters underneath was much more to get it over thousands and many thousands of kilometers from South Africa at a very few dollars per ton. So it's not always, shipping continues to be the more environmentally friendly. There are other examples where getting a bottle of wine from Australia to the port of Hamburg emits less CO2 than the same bottle by truck from Hamburg to Berlin. I mean, just one point on this anonymous question. Sunny is asking about the demand for shipping space is to the trade volume increase. Is it like more the increased demand, or at least more increase in demand than we had expected? Or the inefficiency? My take would be, and colleagues might compliment, it's really the combination of both. It's a good question. How long will it last? Well, that's Sophie is asking, how long will it last? Anybody has a number, please provide the answer. And then Mark has a provocative question. I will answer it to him in private when we meet in the office again. 40, 40, 20, the cargo reservation regimes. Yeah, it's very hypothetical. What would the world look like today if we still had actually the liner shipping conference and cargo reservation regimes? Maybe the freight rates would be more stable, but on average long term, I believe they would be higher. And Krista is asking for a crystal ball. Krista Ball is asking, good to have you here, Krista. And there's one more anonymous on the capacity planning. yeah, it's a bit like the earlier question. At this moment, I do not think carriers are withholding. Colleagues may agree or disagree. And finally, lastly, Dev Kachadi is asking, can individual countries legally undertake regulation of freight rates and impose some sort of upper cap? That's a good question. Maybe Juan Luis, you want to start with that question? So we follow the inverted sequence. Please be brief. Don't try to answer all the questions. We start with Anktat, then we have John, then Shaishan, and Dennis will have the last word. Juan Luis, you have the floor. And thank you for joining us too. So we are here with a strong Anktat team on competition and logistics.
Many thanks. Thank you, Jan. Can you repeat the question, please? Because
so the last question, I thought you could read them actually in the Q&A. It was, can individual countries, that's what we did together when we went to the Latin American seminar, like what can countries do, like National Competition Authority? Can they legally undertake regulation of freight rates and impose some sort of upper cap on foreign flag vessels? It's a journalist from India asking.
No. Okay. For me, the first thing that is necessary to say is competition authorities are not regulators, so it is difficult to regulate some sector like maritime sector, but they have to. They can do the role of advocating and to get new regulations, no from the competition authority, but from the regulator or from the government. So the position of the competition authority, the competition authorities, is to do advisory services to improve regulations, but not to do the regulations. So for me, this is the role of the competition authority, to advocate to improve the regulations, but not to do the regulations. I don't know if this is a response to this question, but for me, in practice, the role of competition authorities is not to regulate markets, but to give technical assistance to the governments or other regulators, sectorial regulators, to improve these regulations in the sector.
Okay, thank you, Juan Luis. Thanks for remaining within the time now. We are already over the time. We stay on, and if people stay on, we are happy to continue some answers to some of the questions. John, any further thoughts on some of the good questions?
Yes, Jan, I'd like to really focus on two questions that came through. Firstly, on the national shipping lines, and I think this talks to a little bit to what I really just touched on in my earlier remarks about how we are able to link developing countries into the global trading system. And obviously, the idea of national shipping lines, which has been tried before, would be one way of ensuring capacity. And this is not just a hypothetical issue. I know certainly that the Indian Export Organization, the Federation of Indian Export Organization, has already started calling for a national shipping line for India, and not just in developing markets, but also there have been similar calls for New Zealand, which again has also been losing out when I believe it's about 40 container ships have missed their scheduled calls within the period of the last few months. So there definitely is an issue here. But would it be right for state-owned, for countries to initiate their own shipping lines? And I have to say, whilst the economics may look good this year with sky-high rates, in the following years things might not look so good. And of course, then these organizations become money pits. And I certainly would not advocate that would be the way forward. But the market has to come up with its own solution. And again, the problem has been that there's been consolidation of shipping lines, there's been consolidation around large ports as well, where the money has flowed into, and there hasn't been the same amount of money which has gone into smaller ports, which would enable the increase in connectivity between developing markets and Western markets. So I think that imbalance will have to be addressed. The problem with smaller shipping lines, and a few years ago I was talking to a startup shipping line which wanted to be the Ryanair of the shipping world, which is exactly what they said. So, an independent, low-cost, no-frills, speedy shipping line. Of course, the problem with that is that they just could not compete on the economics, and that is the overriding problem, that the shipping lines are consolidated for very good economic reasons to drive down the cost per TEU. It's going to be really hard to reverse that. I will touch very, very quickly, as I know we're running time, on digital shipping solutions, which was another question as well. I've been a huge advocate of innovation and disruption in the supply chain. The problem is that you can have the best, the most automated ports in the world. You can have all the electronic bills of lading, etc. Everything can be, but when you have freight sitting outside in the west coast of the US for 14 days, there's nothing you can do. It's down to the hard wiring, down to the pipelines that needs to be addressed, and that's the fundamental issue that we've got to.
Thank you, John. Shaishan, any difficult questions that are left for you to answer?
Yeah, thank you, Huffman. So, that is unbelievable. There are many questions in the line. So I will touch just only if I have a crystal ball. I think everyone, all the shippers at the moment, in the global shippers, everyone needs a crystal ball, because we have a more effect from the COVID, and now we have a shortage of the container and the freight cost increasing. I think this is because of the globalization, and the global supply chain connect each others, and that is a really impact not just only the small countries, but also everywhere on earth. I think this is we have to think and we have to solve together. This is a very complexities and uncertainty, because no one knows how we can get the balancing of the container and the vessel. No one answer. At the moment, China still have more exporting growth, a double digit to US and Europe, and I don't know how to be settled. How when the demand surge, it will be the end. No one answers. And the containers, the new container is just starting because of the COVID. No any factory build up the containers. No any new vessel on the waters. So that's why it takes time. So we have to survive in the short term. Now it's the problems of the logistic flow. Physical flow now is a problems crisis. But we can utilize the information flow, and we have to connect all the information, port, vessels, shippers, consignee, all linked together in order to reduce the transit time, and in order to improve the information flow And finally, we can bring up the logistic flow and we can solve the container circulation. So I think this is the new and the next normal for the container and the maritime for the future. We cannot manage like before. We have to manage by using the daily information, because this is a very complexity. We have to link by utilize the information flow, and in order to people cannot solve it, and crystal ball cannot solve anymore. By using the strengthen the global supply chain, it will be the solution. That's all.
Thank you, Shaishan. So the most difficult questions are left for Denis. You're muted, sorry.
Thank you, Jan. I will try to answer as many questions as possible about regulation and competition authorities, about market, about digital. Regulation and competition authorities, we don't believe that they will be able to solve the situation as of today and maybe in the near future by capping, by I would say, by banning and so on and so on. The main example is what is happening with the present minimum tax international agreement, where the shipping lines might be exempted from this tax because they don't belong to any country. So no country is able to tax their operations because they are, I would say, they are overseas companies, of course, and again they might live without this tax, which will be damageable, of course. So the European European Commission is at the same time a regulation authority with DG Move and anti-competition and competition authorities with DG Com. They are unable to act today. They have no say. They have no proposition to make. And we see the Federal Maritime Commission, of course, they can make an investigation on detention and demurrage, but on the other aspects of collusion and so on, today they have been unable to find out something, whereas they found different things in the past. So we believe that the future is in framing the market. So the regulation authorities, DG Move in Europe, might help to frame the market, the practice and so on. But most of the action will take place at the parties level, the operators level. We have to find ways to be to set more enforceable contracts. You know that in the past, nobody was paying, no shipper was paying for no shows or postponed booking, and at the same time, the liners were not paying for rollovers. So, well, the liners say today they took advantage of this situation in the years 2015 to 2019. Now it's our turn to take advantage of this. We need a more transparent market. The surcharges which have been existing since many years, surcharges on bunkers, surcharges on congestion, and so on, they have to be abandoned, of course. The carriers have to take some risk, and they have to live with this risk, with the contingency being built in their prices. We cannot still have this situation where at any disruption, minor disturbance, there is a surcharge coming in because the freight rates are generally too low for them to absorb this risk aversion, or this taking into account the consequences of this risk. So the market has to find ways to improve the practices, especially for SMEs, which are very fragile and weak, facing these monsters, which are the alliances. So the problem is not breaking out the alliances, because no liner today is able to serve with a good connectivity, good airports. So many countries in the world coming out of Asia, US and Europe to many countries and intra-Asia. So the alliances are here to stay for sure, but their activity must be framed, not regulated, but framed, and the practices must be established. So we strongly believe in that. And now about digital, we believe that we have to work out a system where we will have more digital forecasts. So not only forecast, not only looking back at the mirror or what is the situation on my supply chain today, but what is the forecast of my demand, what is the forecast of my offer, what is the forecast in port operations, the forecast in truck operations, the forecast in waterways operations, and so on and so on. And taking tools like artificial intelligence and so on to drive out the best solutions for today to prevent any risk or any disturbance for happening because of mismatch in the offer and demand of services and goods. So this is the best way the market will be able to achieve a cooperation practice and being able to build a system of data where forecast will have this a good place in order to bring visibility to every operator.
Good. Thank you very much, Denis. Thank you very much, dear panelists. Thank you. Still large number of participants staying on, even though we were a bit over time, but that's just because it's such a fascinating topic. If one were to somehow group the issues we discussed, I would see three main areas. The first one is the whole issue of competition, and not just the freight rates. There was discussion on at the beginning of some coordinated capacity management. There's still today question about surcharges, demurrage charges. We didn't go into the question of vertical integration, which is another one, but how to deal with competition remains a challenge. But we have also said that the alliances, for example, do provide additional services and help to reduce costs. We just to make sure that these are passed on to the shippers. The second cluster of issues we discussed was the crystal ball, the transparency, the information flows along the chain, looking into the future so that we plan. And we were all surprised by what happened a year and a half ago, or less than a year and a half ago. The forecasts were, oh, it will go everything bad, not enough demand. And then we can't blame that carriers at the beginning were reluctant to commit. But now, yeah, there's something about nowcast, and we are, as we speak, writing our next review of maritime transport. We're working on new online statistics. So we do what we can to help with the crystal ball. And last but not least, the whole wide area of practical technical solutions to get the containers through, the congestions out, the digitalization, the trade station, port productivity. There was one additional question coming up, or comment by Michel van Dijk, which I think is very, very valid. So a lot of the activities we do in UNCTAD these days are actually responding to additional requests that we receive from port authorities, from customs authorities, from transport providers, from border agencies, who say now in times of COVID, I need even more support in my single window, my trade information portal, my customs automation, my pre-arrival clearance, my e-payment system, and so on and so forth. And we do observe, I've read numbers saying like we are 5 times faster in the reforms now than before the COVID crisis. I don't know whether it's really 5 times, but certainly there is a lot of progress made on the positive side. So we have to lock in the progress made during lockdown, but hopefully not lock in the high freight rates. So with this, I thank you and panelists for the participation. The recording will be posted. We will try to keep in touch with some of the questions where we have the emails. And then, of course, the PowerPoint, which Shaishan kindly agreed we can share, we will also put under the proceedings. Give us some time. We have many other things on our plate, but I really appreciate your time, panelists, your insights, and hope to see you for our next maritime webinar, which we will announce through UNCTAD's usual channels, website, newsletter, and so on. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful good afternoon, evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.